The sky over Westfield, Connecticut was the color of wet concrete, heavy and low, like it was pressing down on all of us gathered by the grave. Black umbrellas formed a neat line along the marble headstones. Expensive shoes sank slightly into the damp grass. Luxury cars idled nearby, engines humming softly, waiting for grief to finish its business. My name is Walter Grayson. I was 68 years old that morning, a retired civil engineer, a husband, at least I thought I still was in some way. I stood beside my wife's casket with my hands folded, listening to the priest talk about eternity while strangers in tailored suits studied me with quiet judgment. Elaine always hated attention. She would have hated this, that's when it happened. From inside her purse, resting against the polished wood of the casket, a phone rang. Not my phone, not any phone I recognized. The sound was sharp, wrong, out of place. People shifted, a few heads turned. I felt my chest tighten as I reached down and opened her purse. Inside was a sleek black phone I had never seen in 42 years of marriage. Before I could think, I answered. The screen lit up with a single name, Marcus Bell. I had been married to my wife for 42 years. I had never heard that name before. Walter, a calm male voice said as the priest fell silent behind me, Elaine told me you'd pick up. And in that moment, standing beside my wife's grave, I felt my blood run cold. I'm calling about the agreement, the man said calmly. The word agreement didn't belong at a funeral. I stepped away from the casket without asking permission, my shoes sinking into the wet grass as the priest paused mid-sentence. I could feel eyes on my back, family, neighbors, people who had come to measure grief like it was a performance. I didn't look at them. I focused on the phone pressed to my ear, on the voice that spoke like this was any other business call. I think you have the wrong person, I said, keeping my voice low. This is Elaine's husband. There was a brief pause, not surprise, calculation. Yes, the man replied. That's why I'm calling you, Mr. Grayson. Elaine said you might sound confused at first. Confused didn't begin to cover it. He spoke with the confidence of someone who expected cooperation. The kind of man used to boardrooms and closed doors, not gravesides. In the background, I could still hear the priest's voice resume, faint and distant, talking about love and memory and eternal rest. I'm sorry, I said. You said your name was Marcus Bell. That's correct. I don't know who you are. Another pause, longer this time. I was under the impression Elaine explained everything, Marcus said, about the assets, the timing, the instructions. My grip tightened on the phone. Assets. I repeated, my wife is being buried 10 feet from me. What exactly are you talking about? He exhaled softly like a man adjusting plans that had gone slightly off script. All right, he said, then let's slow down. I walked farther away toward a line of bare trees at the edge of the cemetery. My heart was pounding now, not from grief alone, but from something sharper, something colder. You should know, Marcus continued, that Elaine was very specific. She anticipated this moment. I stopped walking. She anticipated her funeral, I asked. She anticipated your reaction, he said, and mine. I thought of Elaine as I'd known her, careful with money, private, organized to the point of obsession. She paid bills early, kept files labeled in neat handwriting, but secrets, another life, what agreement? I asked. I can't go into details over the phone, Marcus replied smoothly. Not here, not today. But Elaine left clear instructions regarding her estate, her holdings, and the order in which certain things were to be revealed. Holdings. The word echoed in my head. We lived comfortably but not extravagantly. A paid-off house, modest savings, no yachts, no offshore accounts, at least not that I knew of. Why did she have a second phone? I asked. That was her decision, Marcus said, for privacy. For privacy from who? I snapped. From you, the silence seemed to say. Ed, Marcus answered, from anyone who didn't need to know until now. I leaned against a tree, suddenly aware of how weak my knees felt. The ground smelled like rain and cut grass. Somewhere behind me, a woman sniffled. Someone else cleared their throat. You're telling me my wife had legal arrangements I knew nothing about, I said, that you were part of her life and I was. I'm telling you, Marcus replied carefully, that Elaine Grayson was very intentional. Everything she did had a purpose. And what was that purpose? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said the sentence that lodged itself in my chest like a shard of ice. We'll proceed as scheduled. The call ended. I stood there staring at the dark screen of a phone that shouldn't exist, listening to my wife's funeral. Carry on without me knowing, without understanding how, that the woman I loved had taken something enormous to the grave. And whatever it was only just beginning to surface. I believed I knew my wife. That belief carried me through 42 years of marriage, through ordinary mornings and quiet evenings, through habits so familiar they felt permanent. Elaine and I lived a modest life by choice, not necessity. We drove sensible cars, took our vacations in the off-season, ate dinner at the same oak table every night at 6:30, the news murmuring in the background. She liked order, lists, routines. Every Sunday morning she balanced the checkbook at the kitchen counter while I made coffee. She always did the finances, not because I couldn't, but because she said it gave her peace of mind. "I'm better with details," she'd say, smiling without looking up. "You build bridges, let me count the pennies." I never questioned it. Elaine never splurged. She clipped coupons even when she didn't need to. She wore her coats until the lining thinned. When friends talked about investments or second homes, she changed the subject. At the time, I thought it was humility. Now, sitting alone in our living room hours after the funeral, the house still smelling faintly of lilies, those memories began to rearrange themselves into something else. There were moments I'd brushed past without thought. The mail she opened before I saw it. The locked filing cabinet in the guest room she said held old work papers. The occasional late-night walks she took alone, phone pressed to her ear, stepping outside when she saw me watching. I had chalked it up to stress or privacy. After all, we had always respected each other's space. Hadn't we? I sat in my recliner, the secret phone resting on the coffee table between my hands. It looked ordinary enough, sleek, expensive, almost impersonal. Nothing about it suggested betrayal. And yet it sat there like an accusation. I picked it up, turning it over slowly. No case, no cracks, no family photos on the screen. This wasn't a woman's everyday phone. This was a tool. A wave of sadness rolled through me, heavy and unexpected. Not anger yet, just loss. Loss of the version of my wife I thought I'd known. Loss of the certainty that our life had been as transparent as I believed. I thought back to our last conversation before she passed. "You'll be okay," she'd said from the hospital bed, her voice weak but steady. "We'll be okay," I'd corrected gently. She'd smiled. A strange smile, I realized now, not sad, not afraid, resolved. At the time, I'd taken comfort in it. Now dread crept in where comfort used to live. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up bright against the dim room and immediately asked for a passcode. I tried our anniversary, denied, her birthday, denied. I sat back, heart thudding. 42 years of shared life, and I couldn't open the phone she carried to her grave. The house creaked softly around me, settling in the evening quiet. For the first time since Elaine died, I felt truly alone, not because she was gone, but because I was beginning to understand that parts of her life had never included me at all. I stared at the glowing screen, my thumb hovering uncertainly. Whatever was inside that phone, Elaine had wanted it hidden. And by opening it, I knew I was crossing a line I could never step back from. I took a breath and tried again. This time, with shaking hands, I went looking for the truth. The phone had a password I didn't know. That realization settled into me slowly, like a chill you don't notice until you're already cold. I sat at the kitchen table long after dark, the overhead light buzzing faintly, the house too quiet without Elaine moving through it. I tried every combination I could think of: anniversaries, addresses, old nicknames. Nothing worked. This phone wasn't meant to be opened by memory. It was meant to be opened by intent. I set it down and stared at it for a long time, then did something I hadn't done in years. I went into the guest room and opened the locked filing cabinet. The key was still taped behind the frame, exactly where Elaine had always kept it. Inside were folders I didn't recognize, not bank statements, not insurance, thin envelopes neatly labeled in her careful handwriting. One of them held a small card, 4 numbers. My pulse quickened as I returned to the kitchen and entered them. The phone unlocked instantly. What I saw didn't feel like betrayal. It felt deliberate: no family photos, no casual texts. The home screen was stripped down to the essentials: messaging app, calendar, email, everything else removed. This wasn't a second phone for fun or secrecy. It was a burner, clean and controlled. I opened the messages first. Most were encrypted threads, no names, just initials, short exchanges, precise language, dates and times, but very little emotion. Confirmed, proceed, hold until directive. I swallowed hard. The calend. R was worse. No birthdays, no reminders to buy milk, just blocks of time marked with 2 or 3 letters at most. MB, RF, JP, always scheduled weeks, sometimes months in advance. Elaine hadn't been reacting to anything. She'd been planning. I tapped the email app next. It required a second password, but the same 4 digits worked again. Inside were folders nested carefully within folders, each one labeled in a way that meant nothing to me: Trust A, Property Holding, Escrow 3. Legal language jumped out immediately. Attachments, PDFs, scanned signatures. My chest tightened as I opened one at random. It was a legal memorandum addressed not to Elaine Grayson but to Emore Holdings, a name I'd never heard before, Elaine's maiden initial. A shell company. I leaned back in my chair, breath shallow. This wasn't a secret affair. This wasn't a hidden hobby. This was infrastructure. The kind built slowly, quietly over years. I thought back to the nights she said she was going for a walk. The days she insisted on driving herself to appointments. The way she always seemed one step ahead of emergencies, insurance already filed, forms already prepared. Elaine hadn't been hiding chaos, she'd been hiding control, and then I saw it. An email at the bottom of the inbox, flagged and starred, timestamped 3 weeks before her death. The sender was the same name that had appeared on the phone at her funeral, Marcus Bell. The subject line stopped me cold. Final distribution, confidential. My hands began to tremble as I hovered over it. I didn't open it, not yet. Something about that subject line felt like a door that only swung one way. Elaine hadn't been preparing for death in fear. She had been preparing for aftermath, for fallout, for people, including me, to react in predictable ways. I looked around the empty kitchen, at the chair she used to sit in, the mug she favored still drying by the sink. I felt a mix of awe and dread settling deep in my bones. My wife had lived a second life right beside me, not to escape me, but to set something in motion I was only beginning to see. I took a breath, steadied myself, and finally tapped the email, because whatever final distribution meant, it was clear now. Elaine had planned this moment down to the last detail. They showed up smiling. That was the first thing that told me something was wrong. It was 3 days after the funeral, the house still crowded with sympathy cards and half-wilted flower arrangements. I was standing at the sink, rinsing a coffee mug Elaine had loved, when I heard tires crunching in the driveway. Not one car, two. By the time I turned around, Diane was already knocking. She didn't wait for me to answer. She opened the door like she belonged there, perfume drifting in ahead of her, face arranged into practiced concern. Behind her stood her son, Evan, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the living room like he was taking inventory. "Walter," Diane said, her voice soft and breathy, "we've been so worried about you." I nodded but didn't step aside. She took that as permission anyway. They moved through the house slowly, deliberately. Evan lingered near the hallway. Diane ran her fingers along the back of the couch like she was remembering something sentimental or estimating value. "I know this must be overwhelming," she continued. "Elaine handled so much, we just want to help." Help, the word sounded hollow. Evan finally spoke up. "Have you had a chance to look at the paperwork yet? You know, wills, accounts, that kind of thing." I set the mug down carefully. "Not really." He exchanged a quick glance with his mother, too quick. "Well," Diane said, forcing a sad smile, "Elaine was always organized. I'm sure she left everything very clear." Her eyes never quite met mine. They stayed on the walls, the furniture, the cabinets Elaine had refinished herself years ago. "Harold Finch called me," Diane added casually like she was mentioning the weather. "He sends his condolences." That made my spine stiffen. Harold Finch was an old name in our family circle, wealthy, well-connected, and never subtle about it. He and Elaine had clashed years ago over something I'd never fully understood. I remembered raised voices once, hushed arguments behind closed doors. "He said Elaine was sharp," Diane continued, "always thinking ahead." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Evan leaned against the doorway now, arms crossed. "There's a lot of talk, Uncle Walter. People are curious." "About what?" I asked. "About whether everything went where it was supposed to," he said. There it was, not concern, not grief, expectation. I suddenly felt like prey surrounded by polite predators. Every question had an angle, every pause felt measured. They weren't here to support me, they were here to see what had surfaced. "I'm tired," I said finally. "This isn't a good time." Diane's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Of course, we understand." She moved toward the door, then stopped, turning back to me with a look that felt too knowing. "Elaine always knew how to protect what mattered," she said gently. The words landed with weight, not comfort, warning. They left shortly after, tires crunching again as they pulled away. I stood alone in the quiet house, heart pounding, replaying the visit in my mind. They hadn't asked how I was sleeping. They hadn't mentioned Elaine as a person, only as a gatekeeper. As the silence closed in around me, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever Elaine had set in motion was no longer private. The family could smell money, and they were circling. He already knew where I lived. That was the first thing that unsettled me. I was standing at the front window late that afternoon, watching the street out of habit more than expectation, when a dark gray sedan pulled up and parked cleanly at the curb. No hesitation, no circling for the right house. The engine shut off and a man stepped out like he'd rehearsed the walk. Marcus Bell didn't knock right away. He straightened his jacket, checked his watch, and waited exactly 10 seconds before ringing the bell. When I opened the door, he smiled politely, professional, contained, the kind of man who never wasted words or motion. "Walter Grayson," he said. "Thank you for seeing me." I hadn't agreed to anything, but he stepped inside anyway, as if the appointment had been made long ago. Marcus was in his mid-40s, clean-cut, calm eyes that gave nothing away. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than him, scuffed, well-used, expensive. "I won't take much of your time," he said, settling into the chair across from me. Elaine valued efficiency. The way he said her name without hesitation, without sentiment, made my jaw tight. How long did you know my wife? I asked. 12 years, he replied evenly. She retained me shortly after a dispute involving extended family assets. That landed harder than I expected. 12 years, I repeated, and I never knew. Marcus nodded. That was intentional. He opened the briefcase and removed a slim folder, sliding it across the table but not opening it yet. Elaine was very clear about boundaries, he continued. She didn't want you burdened by what she was preparing. Preparing. There's a private trust, he said next, like he was discussing the weather. Established under a holding entity connected to Elaine's maiden name. Quiet, legal, substantial. My throat felt dry. How substantial? He didn't give me a number. Instead, he said, enough to change how certain people behave once they know it exists. I thought of Diane's smile, Evan's questions, Harold Finch's name slipping too easily into conversation. And me? I asked. Where do I fit into this trust? Marcus folded his hands. At this stage, you are not listed as the primary beneficiary. The words hit sharp and clean. Not yet, I asked. A faint smile crossed his face. Correct. Anger flared fast and hot. So my wife planned all of this: secret account, secret lawyer, secret phone, and somehow I'm the last to be trusted. Marcus didn't flinch. Elaine trusted you the most, he said. That's why the conditions exist. Conditions, I repeated. Yes. He finally opened the folder, revealing neatly arranged documents. Legal language, dates, signatures, Elaine's unmistakable handwriting anchoring every page. She anticipated pressure, Marcus said. Manipulation, public embarrassment, attempts to provoke you. To provoke me into what? I asked. Reacting, he said simply. I sat back, the weight of it pressing into my chest. There will be a probate hearing, Marcus continued. Sooner than usual, Elaine requested expedited proceedings. And I asked. He glanced at his watch again. Next week. I laughed once, short and bitter. Of course. Marcus stood, closing the folder and returning it to his briefcase. Until then, I strongly recommend discretion. He paused at the door, meeting my eyes. Elaine believed that how you conducted yourself in the coming days would determine everything. After he left, the house felt smaller, tighter, a courtroom, and a trust designed to test me in ways my wife never warned me about. As the door clicked shut behind Marcus Bell, one truth settled in with chilling clarity. Elaine hadn't just planned for her death. She had planned for what came after, and she had planned for everyone. Elaine Grayson was richer than I ever knew. The realization didn't come all at once. It arrived in layers, each one heavier than the last, as Marcus laid documents across my dining table like evidence in a quiet trial. The table where Elaine and I had eaten oatmeal and toast for decades now held papers that spoke a language I had never been invited to learn. These are offshore accounts, Marcus said, tapping one page with a precise finger. Established legally, reported, quiet. I stared at the numbers, my eyes strug. Linked to connect them to the woman who used the same battered leather wallet for 15 years. Why offshore? I asked. For insulation, he replied. From volatility, from people. The word carried weight now. He slid another document forward. This is commercial property, small retail strip outside Hartford, owned under Elaine's maiden name. I felt something twist in my chest. She never mentioned it. She didn't mention most of this, Marcus said gently. The final folder contained statements that made my breath catch. Stock holdings, conservative investments, long-term positions built slowly over time. Current valuation, Marcus said, is just under $4.7 million. The room went quiet. I thought of the nights Elaine told me we couldn't afford new furniture yet, the vacations we skipped, the way she insisted on fixing things herself rather than calling a professional. All choices, all deliberate. You're telling me, I said slowly, that my wife lived like a frugal schoolteacher while sitting on a fortune. Yes, Marcus replied, because she understood perception. Anger stirred then, not loud, not explosive, but deep and sharp. I was her husband, I said. I shared a bed with her for 42 years, and she didn't trust me with this. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He gathered the papers back into their folders, aligning the edges carefully. Elaine trusted you with something far more difficult, he said at last. What's that supposed to mean? He met my gaze steadily. She trusted you to be yourself. I scoffed. That sounds like lawyer nonsense. Perhaps, he said, but it's accurate. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the familiar street. Children rode bikes past my house. A neighbor waved, unaware that my understanding of my marriage had just cracked wide open. I feel like a fool, I said quietly. Like I was married to a stranger. You were married to a strategist, Marcus corrected. One who believed secrecy was a form of protection. For who? I asked. For you, he said, and for what she was trying to preserve. I turned back toward him. Then why am I not the primary beneficiary? Marcus closed his briefcase with a soft click. Because this trust was never designed to reward ownership. Then what was it designed to do? Hesitated for the first time since I'd met him, just a fraction of a second, but I saw it. The conditions, he said carefully, aren't about money. The words settled uneasily in my mind. They're about character, he continued, and restraint and whether love can exist without control. My jaw tight. So this is some kind of test. If you want to call it that, Marcus said. Elaine preferred to think of it as confirmation. Confirmation of what? He stood and moved toward the door. The hearing will clarify everything, he said. Until then, I suggest you prepare yourself, not financially, but emotionally. After he left, I sat alone at the table, staring at the space where the papers had been. I felt hurt, excluded, smaller than I ever had in my own home. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, curiosity. Because if Elaine had gone to these lengths, if she had hidden millions and orchestrated silence and scrutiny, then the truth wasn't simple betrayal. It was intention, and whatever the conditions were, I was already standing inside them. They laughed in the courtroom, not loudly, not enough for the judge to call order, just a soft, shared chuckle that drifted across the polished wood like smoke. It came from the row behind me, from people who shared my last name, my history, and apparently my humiliation. I stood alone at the long table, hands folded, back straight. Diane sat with her attorney 2 rows back, perfectly composed, one leg crossed over the other. Evan leaned forward beside her, whispering something that made her smile again. The judge asked a routine question about my understanding of the estate proceedings. Before I could answer, Diane's lawyer cleared his throat. It's worth noting, he said smoothly, that Mr. Grayson was largely insulated from financial matters during the marriage. Insulated, a word chosen carefully like a blade wrapped in velvet. In fact, he continued, it appears Elaine Grayson handled all significant decisions independently. One could argue she managed certain aspects of her husband's life for his own good. Managed, the word echoed in my ears. A few heads turned toward me, curious, appraising. I felt like an exhibit rather than a man who had just buried his wife. Diane leaned forward then, addressing the judge directly. Elaine was very private, she said gently. She didn't trust easily. Especially when it came to money. Her eyes flicked to me not cruelly but dismissively. As you can see, she added, she didn't even list Walter as the primary beneficiary. That did it. The quiet laughter returned, sharper this time, not cruel enough Oh, object to just enough to sting. I felt my face grow warm, my throat tighten, but I said nothing. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I remembered Marcus's words, discretion, restraint. Still the humiliation burned, 42 years reduced to implication, to suggestion, to the idea that I had been a well-meaning accessory in my own marriage. The judge looked down at his notes, unreadable. Mr. Grayson, he said, do you wish to respond? I stood slowly. No, I said. The word surprised even me. A murmur rippled through the room. Diane's smile faltered just slightly. Evan frowned. I sat back down, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to speak, to defend my love, my intelligence, my dignity, but I didn't, because somewhere beneath the shame a different understanding had begun to take shape. Elaine had known this would happen. The judge raised a hand, silencing the room. There is, he said, a sealed testimony from the decedent that has not yet been entered into the record. The room went still. Diane's lawyer stiffened. Your Honor, we were not informed. The court was, the judge interrupted, at the request of Elaine Grayson herself. My pulse quickened. This testimony, the judge continued, will be presented at the appropriate time. Until then, speculation is neither helpful nor admissible. He looked directly at Diane, then at Evan, then finally at me. Proceedings will adjourn for today, he said. We will reconvene once the sealed material is reviewed. The gavel struck. As people stood and gathered their papers, the laughter was gone, replaced by unease, by questions that no one wanted to ask out loud. Diane avoided my eyes as she passed. Evan didn't look at me at all. I remained seated for a moment longer, hands still folded, breathing slowly. I had been humiliated, publicly, intentionally, and for the first time I understood why. Elaine hadn't left me unprotected. She had let the truth wait until everyone else showed their hand. Her voice filled the courtroom, not imagined, not remembered, real. The clerk dimmed the lights slightly as the screen lowered from the ceiling. A murmur rippled through the room, confusion, irritation, curiosity. I felt my chest tighten as the first frame appeared. Elaine sat at a plain wooden desk, hands folded neatly in front of her. She wore the blue sweater I had given her years ago, the one she saved for serious things. Her hair was brushed back, her expression calm but firm. I am Elaine Grayson, she began, her voice steady. If you are hearing this, then I am no longer alive. A collective inhale swept the room. She didn't waste time. For years, members of my extended family have attempted to access what I built, she continued. Not out of need, but out of entitlement. Diane shifted in her seat. Elaine's eyes held the camera without flinching. Diane Grayson and her son Evan have repeatedly pressured me for money, investments, and influence. When refused, they attempted manipulation, guilt, and threats of public embarrassment. My stomach dropped. She was naming them. I did not trust them, Elaine said plainly, and I had reason not to. She explained how accounts had been probed, how documents had gone missing, how conversations had been twisted and repeated. Her voice never wavered, even as the accusations sharpened. I hid assets, she said next, not from my husband but from those who would harm him. I felt my breath catch. My husband, Walter Grayson, is a good man, she said. He believes the best of people. That is his strength and his vulnerability. My vision blurred. I created the trust to protect him from coercion and from becoming a target, Elaine continued, including from my own family. Diane's lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor, the judge raised a hand. Sit down. Elaine's gaze softened slightly as she spoke my name. Walter was never excluded, she said. He was being tested. A murmur swept through the courtroom. I needed to know that even under pressure, humiliation, and misunderstanding, he would remain himself, that he would not lash out, that he would not trade dignity for control. I swallowed hard, my hands clenched in my lap. If you are hearing this, Elaine said, then Walter has already proven what I needed to know. Her image paused for a brief second before she continued, eyes steady. There is one final condition, she said. The room leaned forward as one. It will determine not only the distribution of the trust, Elaine said, but whether my husband receives it with peace or with regret. The video ended. Silence followed, thick, heavy, absolute. The judge cleared his throat slowly. Diane stared straight ahead, her face pale. Evan looked down at his hands. I sat there, heart pounding, my wife's voice still echoing in my ears, tested, protected, loved in a way I had never fully understood until now. As the judge spoke about scheduling and next steps, I barely heard him. All I could think about was that final condition, and what it would ask of me next. If Walter Grayson still chooses dignity, the judge read the words slowly, deliberately, as if even he understood their weight. The courtroom had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't the awkward silence of gossip or judgment, it was anticipation. Those words weren't legal language, they were personal. The judge adjusted his glasses and continued reading from the sealed document Elaine had left behind. My husband has spent his life avoiding conflict, Elaine had written. Not out of weakness, but out of principle. I needed to know whether that principle would hold when he was provoked publicly, misunderstood deliberately, and stripped temporarily of status. My chest tightened. The judge looked up briefly, then went on. I instructed my attorney to allow my family to believe Walter was uninformed, excluded, and managed. I anticipated they would reveal themselves quickly under that assumption. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Walter was never required to defend himself, Elaine's words continued, only to remain himself. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but I kept my gaze forward. Elaine had known about the courtroom whispers, the laughter, the implication that I was a simple man kept in the dark by a clever wife. She had allowed it to happen not to punish me, but to see what I would do when my dignity was tested. The judge read on. If Walter responds with rage, retaliation, or public humiliation of others, the trust shall bypass him and be distributed to third-party charities as outlined. A murmur rippled through the room. If, however, the judge continued, Walter Grayson remains silent, composed, and refuses to weaponize the truth for his own vindication, then the trust shall transfer fully and irrevocably to him. I exhaled slowly. That was the condition, not obedience, not submission, restraint. Proof of loyalty not to her plan but to who I had always been. The pain I'd felt in that courtroom, the laughter, the implication, the loneliness finally made sense. Elaine hadn't underestimated me. She had trusted me with the hardest task of all. Understanding washed over me in waves, replacing the sharp edge of humiliation with something deeper, something steadier. Elaine hadn't hidden her fortune because she doubted me. She had hidden it because she believed I wouldn't need it to know my worth. The judge closed the folder carefully and looked directly at me. Mr. Grayson, he said, you have remained silent throughout these proceedings. Is there anything you wish to say before the court issues its final ruling? Every face turned toward me. Diane's eyes were wide now, not mocking, not smug, afraid. Evan swallowed hard. I stood slowly, my joints stiff, my heart steady. No, Your Honor, I said. The words felt right. The judge nodded once. Very well, he said, setting the papers aside. The court will now prepare its final ruling. The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but I already knew. Whatever happened next, I had passed the test my wife had designed, not for money, not for control, but for dignity. And that knowledge carried a quiet power no one in that room could take from me. She made me promise to protect you from yourself. Marcus said it quietly, not in the courtroom, but later, after the ruling had been prepared and the crowd had thinned. We sat across from each other in a small conference room that smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. The door was closed. For the first time since I'd met him, Marcus Bell looked less like an attorney and more like a man carrying someone else's burden. Elaine knew you, he continued, better than anyone. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted in a way that went deeper than age. Then why all this? I asked. Why the secrecy? Why the humiliation? Marcus folded his hands. Because she knew you would endure it. That answer stung even if it was true. She anticipated your humility, he said, your instinct to stay quiet, to let others speak first. She also knew that if you'd been told everything from the beginning, you would have tried to shield others from the consequences. I frowned. You mean Diane, Evan? Yes, Marcus said simply, and anyone else who thought proximity entitled them to what she built. I thought back to the phone ringing at the funeral, the timing. The precision, that call, I said slowly. It wasn't accidental. No, Marcus replied, it was the final trigger. He explained then how Elaine had instructed him to wait until the moment grief was most raw, when defenses were down and true character surfaced. The call wasn't meant to inform me, it was meant to start the clock. She wanted the process to unfold naturally, Marcus said, without coaching, without warning. And you? I asked. Who were you to her? He met my eyes unflinching. Her executor, her firewall, nothing more. Not a lover, not a confidant in tea. He way gossip would suggest, a safeguard. She trusted me to carry out her wishes exactly, Marcus said, even when it meant letting you feel lost for a while. I looked down at my hands Elaine had held through illness, through long nights and ordinary mornings. She was afraid I'd give it all away, I said quietly. Marcus nodded, out of kindness or guilt or a desire to keep peace at your own expense. He wasn't wrong. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a single envelope, cream-colored, unmarked except for my name written in Elaine's careful script. She asked me to hold on to this unless the conditions were met, Marcus said. They were. My throat tightened as he slid it across the table. A letter, I asked. The last one, he replied. She didn't want you to read it unless you understood everything first. I didn't open it right away. I just rested my hand on the envelope, feeling the slight texture of the paper, the weight of what it contained. Marcus stood. Take your time, he said. Elaine would have wanted that. As he left the room, I sat there alone, the noise of the courthouse fading into the distance. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something settle inside me, not grief exactly, not relief. Clarity. Elaine hadn't tested me to prove my worth. She had trusted me with her legacy because she already knew it. I picked up the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly. One last letter, one last truth. And I knew before opening it that whatever Elaine had written would change me all over again. My hands shook opening it, not from age, not from fear, from knowing that once I read her words there would be no more questions left to ask. I sat alone in the car in the courthouse parking lot, the envelope resting on my lap. The world outside moved on, doors opening, engines starting, people laughing softly as if nothing monumental had just ended. I slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the letter carefully, like it might tear if I rushed. Elaine's handwriting filled the page, steady, familiar, hers. Walter, if you're reading this, then you did exactly what I hoped you would. I swallowed hard. She wrote without drama, without legal language. Just her voice, plain and direct, the way she spoke to me late at night when there was nothing left to hide. I am sorry for the secrecy, she continued. Not because I regret it, but because I know it hurt you. The words landed gently, but they landed deep. Elaine explained everything. How the money started small, an inheritance from an aunt she never trusted the family to know about. How she invested quietly, patiently, building something she never wanted to spend on herself. How she saw years ago the way Diane's questions sharpened whenever finances came up. The way Evan's charm curdled into entitlement. I knew if they knew what existed, they would come for it, she wrote, and they would come for you. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. You have always tried to carry everyone, Elaine wrote. You would have given until there was nothing left but obligation. I couldn't let that be your ending, she explained Marcus, why she chose him, why she chose silence over disclosure. You didn't need more responsibility, she wrote. You needed protection from others and from your own kindness. The apology came next, simple and unadorned. I am sorry you felt small. I am sorry you were embarrassed. I am sorry I wasn't here to explain it to your face. Tears blurred the page. I hadn't cried at the funeral or in the courtroom. But there, alone in the car, I finally let myself. Then came the last lines, the ones that mattered most. Walter, loving you was the safest choice I ever made. Not because you were easy, but because you were good. My chest ached in a way that was almost unbearable. Whatever you choose to do next, she wrote, do it because it feels right to you, not because you owe anyone anything. You never did. I folded the letter slowly and held it against my chest, breathing in then out. The grief was still there, raw, permanent, but it was no longer tangled with confusion or doubt. Peace had found its way in. Elaine hadn't doubted me. She had believed in me so completely that she trusted I would find my way through the worst moments without losing myself. I sat there for a long time before starting the car, because when I finally did, I understood something clearly for the first time since her death. The story wasn't finished. The money, the family, the fallout, all of that mattered far less than what came next. Elaine had protected me long enough. Now it was my turn to decide what kind of man I would be, with the truth, with the legacy, and with the life I still had left to live. Power reveals character. I used to think that was something people said to justify bad behavior, an excuse, really. Money didn't change people, it just gave them permission to be who they already were. Once the court finalized everything, the calls slowed. Diane tried once more, leaving a voicemail that sounded rehearsed and hollow. Evan didn't try at all. The silence that followed felt deliberate and for the first time welcome. I didn't chase them, I didn't explain myself, I let the distance stay. The first thing I did wasn't flashy. I didn't buy a new car or move houses or suddenly start living like a man with millions. I sat down with a legal advisor and asked one simple question. How do I make this mean something? Elaine had been clear in her letter, not about what to give, but about why. So I created 2 scholarships, small at first. One for civil engineering students at a state school. Another for nursing students. Elaine had always admired nurses, said they carried more weight than they were ever given credit for. The applications weren't based on grades alone. They asked about resilience, about responsibility, about quiet strength. The kinds of things Elaine believed in. I kept my life modest. Same house, same car, same routines. I still made my own coffee every morning, still balanced my own checkbook now, not because I had to, but because it grounded me. Money stayed where it belonged, as a tool, not an identity. When relatives asked, distant ones suddenly interested, I kept my answers short and kind. I'm comfortable, I'd say. That's enough. Some didn't like that, but discomfort, I learned, is not the same thing as injustice. The hardest part wasn't cutting ties. It was accepting that some people only loved the version of you they could benefit from. Once I let that go, the rest came easier. I visit Elaine's grave once a month now. I bring fresh flowers, sit quietly, talk to her, not about the money, not about the court, but about the small things, the neighbor's dog, the way autumn still catches me off guard, the scholarships, the letters I've received from students who didn't know how badly they needed help until it arrived. I like to think she'd approve. Not because I followed her plan perfectly, but because I followed its spirit. I didn't weaponize the truth. I didn't use it to humiliate. I used it to protect what mattered. Elaine once told me that dignity is something you practice long before you need it. I didn't understand what she meant back then. I do now. So if you're ever tested in silence, if you're misunderstood, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside, remember this: dignity outlives greed. And sometimes the truest measure of justice isn't what you take back, but what you choose to build instead. If this story meant something to you, stay. There are more truths worth telling.